Hey and welcome back to ConnorLikesTech. In our previous videos we have installed Windows Server 2016, we've set up Hyper-V, and we've installed our first virtual machine. In this video we're going to be looking at creating our first domain controller, promoting it to be a DC, so a domain controller, setting up some basic DHCP settings, and setting up some basic DNS settings, and we'll also have a very quick overview of how subnetting works and obviously where to get your IP addresses from. So let's get this video started by opening up Server Manager. We then want to obviously open up our DC virtual machine, so that at the minute for me is just a blank Windows Server 2016 machine. Once it's turned on and booted up, go ahead and log in. And as always, because this is a brand new machine, we want to go ahead and rename it. So go ahead and log in. And the first thing I'm going to want to do, as always, is to rename my machine. That is obviously because this is a brand new install of Windows Server 2016 and it's created its own name. So I'll be back in 2 seconds time. I'm ready to go ahead and do that. So once you've logged in, minimize Server Manager, click on File Explorer, right click this PC. So now it's a good idea to start thinking about the naming convention you want to use across your servers. So in my case, I've already named my virtual box LikesTech-DC01. Now obviously for me that's my reference, but what I like to do is keep my virtual box name and the server name to be the same. So I actually quite like the naming convention that I've picked already. So my domain is going to be LikesTech, or the server name is going to be LikesTech. My server is going to be called DC01. So what that means is, LikesTech is just a name that I personally like, DC stands for domain controller, and 01 just basically means the first domain controller. Now the reason I do that is because in my situations I normally have 2 domain controllers per site. So I want to be able to know which is my primary, which is my secondary domain controller. I do that by simply doing LikesTech-DC01 and LikesTech-DC02. Now you can name them whatever you like. You haven't got to call it DC01. It's just a good practice in my opinion to know what your servers are just by their name, rather than having to guess at what they are, and it just becomes messy the more servers you get. So go ahead and click OK, and at this stage it'll make you restart. So once it's restarted, we'll go ahead and start configuring our domain controller. So after it's restarted, it's always good just to check that you've renamed it correctly and that's actually happened, the rename's happened. Now I've never known it not to happen, but again I always check just so I know that I'm on the right line basically. Now the reason this is because if you name your domain controller incorrectly, changing the name later can cause you a lot of problems, so make sure that your name is as you want it and correct. So mine is LikesTech-DC01, spelled correctly, looks fine, I'm happy. So before we go ahead and start installing all the roles and features, we need to make sure that our server has a static IP address. So go ahead and right click on the network on the bottom right hand corner, click Open Network and Sharing, click Change Adapter Settings, right click on Network, click Properties, I untick IPv6, I double click on IPv4, and here we go. So if you're watching previous videos, you'll know that I'm actually using my home router as my default gateway. That means I can essentially go out to the world on the servers, just so I can download things and make it easy for myself. If your environment is obviously just a test environment, you've got no router in place, then don't worry about setting a default gateway, but because obviously I want to be able to use that functionality in my domain, I'm going to go ahead and configure that now. Now you might be wondering at this stage, well, Connor, where do I get an IP address from? How do I know what IP addresses are available? So I'll go ahead and show you that very quickly. So if it does my virtual host, which has automatically got an IP address assigned, go to CMD and click IP config. I'll bring this over here very quickly. So as you can see, my virtual host has got the IP address of 192.168.0.15 on a subnet mask of 255.255.255, and my default gateway is 192.168.0.1. Now, what does that mean in English? What does that actually represent? So my default gateway IP, this is my home router. So like I said, if you're in a test environment and you haven't got a router attached to your server or attached to your little network you've got set up, then don't worry about this. This is basically just your last point of contact before you're going out to the world, essentially. So it goes from my computer to that default gateway address, which is my Virgin Media router or BT router, and then goes out to Virgin Media and out to internet. The subnet mask, well, this basically means what IP addresses can I have within my default gateway subnet. So I'll explain that a little bit further so you understand. So if you go to a website called subnet-calculator.com, you will see you've got this lovely little subnet calculator. Now, I recommend always using a subnet calculator. Although subnetting can seem quite easy, it's also quite easy to make a few mistakes using a subnet. So I'll go ahead and show you what this actually means in English before we go ahead and start configuring anything. So at the top left, you'll see network classes. Now, depending on what class of network you have, essentially means how many hosts you've got per subnet. And that in English means how many IP addresses do I have within that range. So if you see here, my IP address is 192.168.0.1. My subnet is a 255.255.254, and that means I've actually got 254 IP addresses available to me within that range. One is being used by my default gateway. 255 is being used for my broadcast address, and my subnet ID is 0.0. So essentially I know that I could have IP address 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 100 or whatever, it doesn't really matter. So you can tell this down here because your host address range is 192.168.0.1 to 254. So the reason for making sure you have the right network class is basically just to make it easier on yourself. Now, if you've got a very small flat network and you've only got, I don't know, 50 devices, then a Class C network would work fine for yourself. If you're going to want to start using different VLANs on your network and you want more IP ranges, then a Class B could be useful as it gives you 65,000 IP addresses, and also you've got a 00 subnet, so you could subnet off or VLAN off different IP scopes. Now, I'm not going to go into too much about how all this works. Essentially, all you need to know is if this is your IP address, or say for instance mine was 15, I could put that in there as well. It would still show us the right value. So that's pretty much it in the basic terms. We will go in depth in this in later videos, but for now we'll keep it as simple as that. All I know is that if my IP address falls within these two values, then we should be fine. So I'm going to go ahead and just configure a few settings what I know. So I know my default gateway is 192.168.0.1. I know that because my router's IP address is that. I know the subnet mask is a 255.255.255.0. Now these two values can never change in my network. That's because this is the subnet mask of my default gateway, which means that's basically the range I have to play with on my home router. Now what I could do at this stage is jump onto my home router and check its DHCP table and see what addresses are being used, but I'm a bit lazy, as you probably are yourself, and I can't bother to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back to my virtual host command prompt window here and type in ping. Now I quite fancy the IP address 192.168.0.100. There's no preference for that. You could have it 0.2, 0.3, 0.200, doesn't really matter. But I'm going to go ahead and ping that address. Now because that doesn't return anything, it says destination host unreachable, that means to me that I know that that IP address isn't being used on my network. Now if it started pinging at that stage, so say if I was to ping 0.15, that returns an address. That means that is currently being used on my home network, which means you can't use that because it's already in use. So I'm going to go ahead here and type in 192.168.0.100. DNS server address. Well, I want this server to be my DNS server going forward. So I'm going to configure this now, and I'm going to type in 127.0.0.1. Now you might be wondering, why don't we put in this IP address? Well, you can do, it doesn't matter. However, 127.0.0.1 basically resolves to localhost, as in this machine. So this is saying use the DNS server of this machine. If you wanted to, you could type in the 192 address, but for now, because it's just a good practice on domain controllers or localhost IP DNS servers, I'm going to go ahead and leave it as that. I'm going to go ahead and press OK. So before we jump in and start installing any roles and features, what we want to do is just double test that everything's working. So I'm going to open up command prompt on this server here. I'm going to go ahead and open command prompt up on this server here. Let's move these side by side quickly. Let's go ahead and run ipconfig on both of these very quickly. So as you can see, it's made sure the values are correct. So 0.1 is my default gateway, that's correct, and my subnet mask is the same. So I should now be able to ping 192.168.0.100. And that doesn't resolve. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to here and ping 192.168.0.15. Aha, that works. So what we're saying right now, we're saying that our virtual host domain controller can ping our virtual host, but our virtual host can't ping our DC. So the reason I've done this is basically just to show you how to diagnose this problem. Now I know, well, I'm pretty sure that that's probably a firewall problem. So I'm going to go ahead and just check my firewall settings on this server. I'm going to go ahead and open up my server manager, click local server, click Windows Firewall, Advanced Settings, Windows Firewall Properties, and I'm going to turn off every single firewall. Now you might be saying, Connor, well, isn't that really insecure? Well, not really, because nothing ever remotely connects to your server at this stage. In my situation, it's going to go through my home router's firewall first, and because this is just a test environment, I don't need to worry about too much about Windows Firewall features at this stage. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now, in the real world, I actually turn off internal firewalls across all my servers. It just makes life a lot easier for myself. Now, if I wanted to, I could just add in rules and exceptions, but for me, there's no need to do that right now, so I'm going to go ahead and click Close. Close again, minimize that. I should still be able to ping my virtual host. As you see, that's working correctly. And I should now, if things are working correctly, be able to ping my new DC. And as you see, that works correctly. So at this stage, I know that these two devices can communicate. I'm pretty happy that the settings are configured correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and start setting up this domain controller. So the first thing you want to do is jump into Server Manager again, click on Manage and click Add Roles and Features. I'm going to go ahead and click Next as always. Role-based or feature-based installation. Select a server pool, so that's saying what server do you want to install these things on. Well, obviously we've only got one at the minute and it's this. Go ahead and click Next. So you want to add three things at this stage. You want to add Active Directory domain services, add features. You want to add a DHCP server, add features, and a DNS server. Go ahead and click Next. Go ahead and click Next, and then just go through this little last wizard. So this is saying Active Directory domain services stores information about users, computer, and other devices on the network. Well, that's what we're aiming to get. ADDS requires a DNS server to be installed. We're doing that. So go ahead and click Next. Things to note, you should configure at least one static IP address on this computer. Well, we've already done that. And before you install a DHCP server, you should plan your subnet scopes and exclusions. We'll touch on that later on. Go ahead and click Next. Next. And install. Now this will take a few minutes, so I'll come back once we finish the installation process. Okay, so now the roles and features I've installed, you'll see you've got a few things to complete. So there's two ways you can do this now. You can configure your DNS and DHCP first, or you can promote it to be a domain controller. Now, because there's a few features I want to show you in case you ever get in this situation, I'm actually going to do it, I'm going to say the wrong way around, but the way I like to do it is to promote it to be a domain controller first. So go ahead and click your notifications and click promote this server to be a domain controller. So in the deployment configuration page, you can see we've got three options. Do you want to add a domain controller to an existing domain? Now in our case, we haven't got an existing domain, so that's not going to apply to us. Add a new domain to an existing forest. Again, I haven't got an existing forest, so I want to go ahead and create a new forest. I'm going to call my root domain name likestech.co.uk. So what you can do at this stage is basically make up any name you want. If obviously you work for an enterprise company, you might have a naming convention you want to use, but it doesn't really matter as long as it's a name dot something, so .co.uk, .org, .com, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Now what I will say is it's a good idea to keep this root domain name under 15 characters. Now I'll explain why later on, but just bear that in mind now. If it's over 15 characters, you might have a few little, I'm not going to say problems, but a few little annoyances later on. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next on that. It's now telling me I've got a domain controller options page, which is basically saying what do I want my function level to be. Now, if you've already got an existing domain controller, so say this is a secondary domain controller, you might want to match up your forest function levels and match up your domain function levels. In our situation, we're on a 20server 2016 box. There's no need for me to go ahead and make it any older version. I want this to be a global catalog, and I want this to be a DNS server. I don't want it to be a read-only domain controller. So in certain situations, you might have two domain controllers, one on your corporate site, so this box here, and then one at, I don't know, say the vet site or the doctors or whatever you want. And essentially all that RODC, read-only domain controller, does is just allow authentication without having to come back and jump to your site. So in our situation right now, we haven't got to worry about setting this up. We've got to now set a directory services restore mode password. Again, make sure you're making notes of these passwords. If you ever forget these passwords, you're going to have a very rough time. So go ahead and click next. So this is saying here that it cannot create a delegation for this DNS server. That's because we haven't currently got DNS configured, so we can do that later. So go ahead and click next. And now it's going to verify you the Netbios name. Now this is why I said earlier that it needs to be 15 characters or less. And I'll demonstrate this very now while this is loading up. I'll move this to one side very quickly. And I'll open up Notepad. So we've just created likestech.co.uk. And that is our FQDN, or fully qualified domain name. Now, a Netbios name is essentially your fully qualified domain name, but without the .co.uk. So in my case, it would be LikesTech. Now, the way you would use this is for maybe logging on. So you could do, I don't know, say I wanted a user called Connor. And when they log on technically as Connor at likestech.co.uk. If they wanted to log in with the Netbios, what they would do is likestech/Connor. Now, if your Netbios name is 15 characters or more, so in this case, I'm going to go ahead and do ConnorLikesTech123. What will happen is that will always be the FQDN. However, the Netbios name can't be 15 characters. So instead of going ConnorLikesTech123 / Connor to log in, it would have to automatically resolve itself to 15 characters. So in our case, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Which means the Netbios would be ConnorLikesTech. Now, although that isn't really an issue, because as long as you remember them details, you'll be fine. However, because you'll be constantly seeing this as under your Active Directory and everywhere else, you might often forget that your Netbios is different to your fully qualified domain name. So that's why I like to keep it under 15 characters. It just keeps things nice and tidy, and also means you can have a mental sort of reference when logging in. Sometimes using your fully qualified domain name can be a longer way or longer method of logging in. So we like to use a Netbios name. That's just a brief overview right now of where you see these things, but again, we'll go over this later on in some more depth when we need to. But for now, we should see on our configuration page, our Netbios name is LikesTech. So go ahead and click next. If at this stage you did make it over 15 characters and think, actually, I don't want to do this, you can just go back and rechange some values. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and click next. It's now asking me where I want to store the Sysvol, log file, and database folder. Now, I like to always keep them in the root of C. I don't personally know any reason why you'd move these to central storage or another location. I quite like them being there. It just keeps them uniform across all the servers. If you want to change them, you can do, but for me, I like them being there. So I'm going to go ahead and click next. This is basically saying here, do you want to review your options? So the new BIOS name is likestech.co.uk, that's correct. The NetBIOS is LikesTech. It's a DNS server, it's a global catalog. It currently can't create us a DNS delegation, that's fine. That's the location for these. And obviously we've set the new password. So what I would do at this stage again is make some notes of this, make sure you write this information down. If you forget this information here, you can find it later apart from that password. So go ahead once you're happy with that and click next. What it'll do now is just basically check all the prerequisites and make sure it can set up what it needs to set up. If you see any yellow exclamation marks in here, I'll probably see one for a DNS zone and one for maybe, yep. So you can see I've got one here for a DNS zone, that's fine, we already know about that. And this one's here is saying Windows Server 2016 domain controllers have a default for the security setting named allow cryptography algorithms compatible with Windows NT. That prevents weaker cryptography algorithms when establishing security channels. You haven't got to do anything about that, it's just like, you know, that's the case. Everything else has passed successfully, so go ahead and click install. Obviously at this stage if you have different errors you can Google them and find out what they are, but if you followed my guide so far you should be fine, so go ahead and click install. Now it will take a few minutes to do this here. It's going to create your global catalog, it's going to create your active directories, it's probably going to make you DNS, probably going to make you DHCP, and a few other settings which we'll look into after all these are finished installing. So I'll return back in a few minutes once we've finished setting these up. So after it's finished installing them, you should get hopefully a server was successfully configured, and it'll say you're about to be signed out, and there we go. You just finish off the setup. So we're back again in 2 minutes time once we've restarted. So the server's now restarted, and straight away you can see that it's showing me my Netbios name /administrator. So just to prove the theory, if you like, I want to log in as administrator, and as you see at the bottom it says into LikesTech, which is my domain. You can, if you wanted to, put likestech.co.uk and then your password in. As you can see, I now log back into my server. So we need to go ahead and finish off some configuration. So the first one I'm going to go ahead and look at is my DHCP and make sure that's set up correctly. So go ahead and click Tools in the top right hand corner and open up DHCP. So as you can see in here, our new FQDN, LikesTech.co.uk, is attached to our server name. And if you click on IPv4, it says before a DHCP server can issue IP addresses, you must create a scope and authorize a DHCP server. So what is a DHCP server? What does it mean and what does it do? Well, essentially, if any device in your network connects to, I don't know, you plug it into a LAN port or you connect to the Wi-Fi, a DHCP server literally handles what addresses it can use. It knows about your addresses, it's good for device management. So I'm going to go ahead and just right click on here and click authorize. Right click it again, and you should see it now to say unauthorized. So go ahead and click refresh and it should now turn green. So at the minute I've got no scope options made, so that means if I was to add another virtual machine right now, point it to this DNS server and put it on my network, it wouldn't actually get an IP address automatically. So I'm going to go ahead, right click configure options. Sorry, that's incorrect. I'm going to go right click on IPv4 and click new scope. Go ahead and click next. So I'm going to call this whole network. At this stage, if you're on a network with a router that could handle VLAN in, then you could add multiple scopes. But because I'm on just a normal home router with a flat network, I know I'm only going to have one scope option. So my start IP address, well, we know from before that is 192.168.0.1, that's my default gateway. And my end address is 192.168.0.254. Now, because it's a 255, you would think, well, maybe you can go up to 255. Well, you can't because it's your broadcast address. So as you can see, your subnet mask automatically knows what it's going to be. So go ahead and click next. Add exclusions and delay. Well, at this stage, I don't want to exclude any IP addresses from that list. I'm going to show you how to do that manually later on. So I'm going to go ahead and click next. Lease duration. Now, this basically says how long do you want an IP address to be stored in DHCP. So say if you was on quite a saturated network. Say if you was, I don't know, you had say a school and you only had 254 IP addresses that were available and you had 200 computers on site, that only leaves you really about 40 IP addresses that can be assigned to devices. So in that stage you might want to have it just set to a day, so if clients are coming and going all the time it would automatically release some IP addresses. If like me, I'm in a home network and I've only got about 10 devices but I've got 200 IPs that I could use, then 8 days is fine. I want to configure these options now. So because in my case I use my home router as my default gateway, I can go ahead in here and set up my default gateway. Make sure you click add or it won't store it, and go ahead and click next. Parent domain, well that's my new domain I've just created. And this is here my DNS server, well that's this server. So go ahead and click next. Don't worry about this setting for now. I want to activate this state. I want to activate this scope now. Go ahead and click next and click finish. And there we go, you can see in here we now have the availability to use DHCP on our domain. Now if you've got a router on site, you'd actually point the DHCP server from the router to this server. Now, I'm not going to do that right ahead now because obviously this is a live environment, but essentially if that was what you're going to be doing on site, then you would set that up now. But for me, I don't need to do that. I'm going to leave that as it is for now, and go ahead and look at DNS now quickly. So go ahead and open Server Manager again, go to Tools and click DNS. And there we go, DNS. So if you open up forward lookup zones very quickly, you'll see your domains in here. And you will already see, if I make this a little bit bigger quickly, that my LikesTech DC01 has the IP address of this, and it's under this parent domain. So what that means is if I was to go to run on here now and open up command prompt, and I was to ping LikesTech-DC01, if I type in ping, that really helps, LikesTech-DC01, what it actually does is it checks my DNS on my server and says, aha, I know what that device is because of its name, and I know what that IP address is. Now it's returning its MAC address because actually it's localhost, but I'm going to show you a little trick you can do here, and we'll elaborate on this later on in the next videos, but for now I'll show you exactly how to set this up. So if I wanted to create a new host record, okay, and I wanted to call, I don't know, let me call this cheese, this example, okay, and I wanted to, when I was to ping cheese, it to actually ping this IP address. I'm going to go ahead and type in 192.168.0.100 and go ahead and click add host. Host was created. So now if I go to CMD and type ping cheese, it will return that address. Now, this isn't really a practical use of DNS, this is just more an example of what it does and how it works. The same theory applies if you type ping cheese.likestech.co.uk. It will ping the same value because that's my fully qualified domain name. Now you'd use that across sites because say if you had a computer and its name was, I don't know, computer 123, okay. Instead of having to type in its IP address every time to ping it or access it, you could type in its name and it'll resolve using DNS. Now the final thing to do to set up DNS, it's a bit hard to fully explain in my setup because we're using a home router. So what I'm going to do ahead right now is I'm just going to go in here very quickly and change my DNS server very quickly. And I'm just going to make this a value that doesn't exist. So because my home router uses DNS and it's got an inbuilt DNS server, this will actually work for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and break it very quickly. So, if I was to go to run again in CMD, whatever value I type in here to ping, so if it was cheese for instance, the first thing it would check is if cheese exists in our DNS zones, our forward lookup zones, and because in our case it does. So it instantly will know straight away where cheese is. Now because I've obviously currently broken my DNS server, it's not looking here to get our values first of all, which means it doesn't know where cheese is. It'll go to try and find the DNS server of what I've just set of 123.123.123, which doesn't work, so it won't return that value. Now, what if that was set to the correct server, but cheese still doesn't exist in it? So what if I was to ping, I don't know, Fred, okay? Now, because obviously we've currently broken it just for testing purposes, it would check our forward lookup zones, and the first thing it would do is check for the name Fred, which isn't in here. Now in our case, because we've done a home router, it would then do a next hop to our router and say, use this DNS server and go out to the world. However, in sort of an enterprise version or a standard work environment, you won't have that feature built into your router. So you need to go ahead and right click on here and go ahead and click properties. And at this stage, you can create what's called a forwarder when it loads. So if I didn't have a router in place and I wanted to use an external IP address or DNS name, I could use Google's DNS server. So that means what you'd do if you typed in pingfred.co.uk, it would check in our forward lookup zone first, wouldn't find Fred, and then it would take that name and check it against Google's DNS servers. If it exists in Google DNS servers, it'll return a web page. So I'm going to go ahead and just click OK in there for now, and as you can see, it's instantly resolved. So I'm going to go ahead and click Apply and click OK. So that means now if I go back in here, click Properties, Forwarders, you'll see a green tick, which means it's basically working at this stage. So if I go back to here very quickly and change my adapter settings and put this to the same address just so we know it's working, 8844, and then ping 8.8.4.4, we can see that we can actually ping that address, which means if it's working correctly, we should actually now be able to resolve addresses. So google.co.uk should now work. Now that's because at the minute it will check our forward lookup zone first, it won't find it in there, and then it will go to Google's DNS server to look that up. So what I'm going to do now is just open my network and sharing, change my adapter settings, and just point it back to this machine. And this will test that our DNS forwarder is working. Because obviously if it wasn't working, it would check our domain forward lookup zone first and not go anywhere. I'm just going to go ahead and try another website. Let's try the BBC in the UK. Oh, I wanted to click yes, sorry. And there we go, working correctly. So the final thing we want to do is create a reverse lookup zone. Again, this is done the same way as creating a forward lookup zone. So go ahead and click New Zone. I want this to be a primary zone. To all DNS servers, that's fine, I've only got one. I want it to be an IPv4 because that's what address we've configured in here. Forward lookup zone is an IPv4 address. And the network ID is 192.168.0. Go ahead and click Next. Next. And Finish. And what that means here is essentially, I won't go into too much detail how this worked, but instead of resolving it as 192.168.0.1, it reverses it the opposite way, so it will check 0.168.192, etc. We'll go down into further details about everyone exactly what these do and how these work, but just to get us up and running today, we'll leave it there to keep it nice and simple. So the final thing we want to do is just double check our server manager and just double check on our notifications up here. So it's saying configuration required for the DHCP server. Now we've done this manually, so this should work straight away. So go ahead and click Next and click Commit. It will say fail, that's because we've already done that, so go ahead and click Close. And we should see in a second that this should disappear. Any second, let me just refresh Server Manager very quickly. And there we go, no notifications. So the final thing to do at this stage is to add our virtual machine, our virtual host, which is this server behind our DC, to this domain. So now we've got a DHCP, DNS and a domain controller configured. The final thing I want to go ahead and do is add my virtual host machine, the one that's hosting my domain controller, to the same domain. So go ahead and open up File Explorer, this PC, Properties, and go ahead and click on Change Settings. Click Change and select Domain. So our domain is likestech.co.uk. If at this stage you get a message saying cannot find the DNS server, make sure that your virtual host DNS server is pointing to your DC. So you can go ahead, right click on Open Network and Sharing, click Change Adapter Settings, right click on Properties, open IPv4 and add in the DNS server IP address here. And what you can also do just to make sure that them settings have applied is to type in here ipconfig/flush DNS, and that'll just reset any settings of your old DNS server that may reside within there. So go ahead now and authenticate. So I've obviously just got one user a minute called administrator and my password. Go ahead and click OK. And there you go. Welcome to the LikesTech.co.uk domain. It'll now restart very quickly, so I'll go ahead and do that, and I'll be back to finish off this video. So after your server's restarted, it's always good to go ahead and double check your settings have applied correctly. So for one final time, right click this PC, Properties, and you can see here my full computer name is virtualhost01, and the FQDN, or the domain, is likestech.co.uk. We can open up our domain controller, Tools -V, go to DNS, so Server Manager, Tools DNS, forward lookup zones, and you will now see that virtualhost01 with its IP address is in the DNS table. We can also test that the theory we applied earlier still works, so I should be able to now ping virtualhost-01, and that works correctly. We should also be able to ping virtualhost.likestech.co.uk, and that also works. So at this stage now we have two servers on the same domain, and I think we're going to end this video there. So in this video we've configured a domain controller, we've promoted it to be a DC, we've done some basic setup with DNS, some basic setup with DHCP, and we've added our virtual host to the same domain. In the next video I'm going to have a quick overview of what Active Directory is and how to use it. We'll have a quick look at Sysvol, and we'll also have a very quick look at group policy. I've been ConnorLikesTech, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. Thank you, bye bye. If you have enjoyed the video, please give me a thumbs up. If you've hated the video, then give me a thumbs down. And if you do want to see more content like this, then please do click subscribe now. I've been Connor, goodbye.